Welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. Today is definitely a fiber and fabric day. I have been busy this last week working on my English paper piecing and finally getting the wheel out again and embarking on my challenge to do a test spin, do a little bit of spinning every week with a different fiber. So let's just go ahead and dive right in to fiber. We'll get to the English paper piecing and the other quilt projects that I've been working on the second half of this podcast. So I know last week I shared a bag of fluffy fiber. It was a breed study sample pack. But as I thought more and more about what I wanted to do, I decided I was going to dive into the cellulose fibers. It is something I had planned for 2023. I wanted to finally start to compare cellulose fibers, see how they spin, decide which ones I like to spin, which ones I don't like to spin, and maybe what they're look into a little bit more how they can be used. So I decided to start with flax, which is why you see I do have my distaff actually wrapped. And I know from the way I'm seeing it in the camera behind me, it looks more like someone's hair that has been bandaged onto a stick, but it did work. For those of you that follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you'll have already seen some short videos. Or actually here, I remember on YouTube, I did share a short there as well. I'm getting the getting a handle on this whole making shorts versus making regular videos, and it's an interesting way to capture a moment, I guess you could say. So I decided to spin flax. I have spun cotton before, and I have been successful in spinning cotton. I have not spun a great deal of it because for some reason when it comes to spinning my non-wool fibers, I tend to want to have a project in mind. And maybe it's because I don't have as much of this fiber on hand. I have a lot of fleece on hand. And so maybe that's why I limit it. It might be also that it spins differently and it makes me move out of my comfort zone. That's probably the whole point, right? So I have spun cotton before, and I will be spinning cotton during this upcoming half year of looking at different fibers. I have quite a bit of cellulose-based fibers that my son and I purchased for me to do this study. I have quite a few of them. I did not make a count to see how many there were and how many weeks that would be. But I do know that I have some regular cotton, and I also have some Egyptian cotton, and I want to compare how the two of those look and feel and spin. But that will be in the future. When, I don't know. I think I'm probably going to be very unorganized in my process of picking my fibers. It may just be whatever strikes me as interesting during that week. But I decided I wanted to do flax first. The main reason is it is a fiber I hadn't really spun before. I tried to spin it. I think I ended up being given, I think, some remnant bags by somebody. I can't remember when or how I ended up, but I ended up getting some flax and some ramie given to me. And I think I tried spinning flax once with no success and not understanding why I would want to do so. So we're not counting that as my first spinning of flax because I didn't even have the bag labeled. So I think in my own mind, I forgot that I even had actually tried. But flax I do have some flax in this form, and I believe, again, I am admitting that this is all new, but this is, I believe it's called, well, it's on the package. It is flax strick, and it's wrapped up like this, and I've seen some wonderful, wonderful footage of people spinning it, and I will be sure to link below. I will be sure to link below the videos that I watched in preparation for this. One of the things that I do is I have a bunch of playlists. If you go to my my channel, you can find I have a lot of playlists. I make playlists for my own content, but I have 1 or 2 playlists that I've made of other people's content. It is where I put videos that help me understand what I'm looking at, that I think might be useful for other people, but so that I can find them again. And one of the playlists I have is the stuff I watch that's of historical nature. And I have, there's a wonderful clip of a obviously expert spinner spinning flax from a distaff, and it's beautiful to see. It is really beautiful to see flax being spun by someone who's well versed in it. I am not necessarily well versed. You might notice though that I did figure out that spinning it from the distaff while it's attached to my wheel was not comfortable for me. It worked. I managed to do it well enough. In fact, I found that spinning very, very fine flax single was easier with it on the wheel, the distaff on the wheel. But let me grab this. There we go. But I found, for me, taking it like this and putting it under my arm and drafting off in this position, as I've seen some of the people do in other videos, that actually was, hold on. That actually was much easier for me, much easier physically for me to do that. So I have 2 bags of flax. This is flax top. And I decided to go ahead and use that as opposed to open up the strick, because I get the feeling that when I do spin this, I'll probably need to do a little prep with it based upon the other information and videos that I've seen. I also have a feeling that I want to have this for a project, not just a sample. Whereas spinning from this, the fibers are shorter. Okay. So I chose to spin from top, and the truth is, it was not any more finicky than spinning quite a number of wool fibers that I've spun in the past. I did spin using wet, with keeping my fingers wet. I discovered that it dries out your hands quite a bit. It dried out my hands quite a bit. So it actually pulled more moisture out of my hands than spinning wool has ever done. So that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting. Oh, I should probably show you my little 14 yards of linen thread that I have now made. It is, I would say it's about the same thickness as if you do doily crochet, very fine filigree crochet, or embroidery. It's very much about the same as a pearl cotton. It has softened. This is the thing. I'll go ahead and take it, even though I haven't really tied it off much. We'll go ahead and take it off that. When I initially spun it and plied it, I plied it back on itself. Yes, I used a center pull ball and plied it back on itself, and it handled beautifully. It's strong. I mean, I can't get over how strong it is. But I'm also really amazed at how soft it is getting, how the drape is coming. The more I mess with it, the more I play with it, the more the drape starts to show up. So these are the things that I've learned from doing this little spin. First, don't have any open wounds like my my quilting injuries. Don't have any open wounds on your hand. Have something to hydrate your hands with around to keep doing that. Decide if you want to use the wet spin or dry spin. It's from what I understand, it's a preference. I liked it because it really did control the fuzzies. Keep in mind, it is a very, very strong fiber. This is not going to draft apart or break apart easily if it is spun properly. When you're spinning wool and you have a section you're unhappy with, you can easily kind of pull it apart and start over. This is not easy to break. If I got too thin, yes, I did have, when I was doing the plying, I had one break in it. But it's very, very strong. I read a number of things that talked about having a low twist. I did that. Definitely spun it worsted. So I think I may have already put some of the video of me spinning this as I've been speaking. But the thing that I really learned with this, for me at least, it is not going to ever be a favorite fiber to spin for me. With that being said, if I was a weaver, if my daughter was here to weave something with it, I would totally jump into spinning all that stuff that's on that distaff there, spinning up a huge project so that she could use it as the warp, and so she could actually try her hand weaving a fabric called linsey woolsey. And if you look up linsey woolsey, what you're going to see in short is that linsey woolsey was a way to make I guess you could say maybe a less expensive fiber, utilitarian fiber for clothing, for household items, in which you had the warp threads, the long ones that are on the loom. The warp threads were made out of the linen, and then the weft, the stuff going across, was made out of the wool. I can completely understand why this would have been a fabulous warp thread. Why, when spun thinner, this would be an extraordinarily economical and useful and utilitarian in its versatility fiber to spin. Not only was it something that could be grown more easily than maybe and more economically than raising sheep would have been, but it is strong. So depending on how thick you're spinning it, depending on how many plies you're plying with it, it's really its potential is endless with what you can do. So I can see how historically in antiquity this was such an important fiber. I've even considered doing this as a 3-ply and having it my drive wheel band for my spinning wheels. It is, I had a small little area I tried to break off, and let's just say if you want to break this, it's better to get the scissors out. So again, I see the value in this, besides the fact that linen is a wonderful fabric. It's a wonderful textile. As far as a hand spinner goes, as far as me, I'm not sure I'm going to be knitting with this. I'm not sure I'm going to be crocheting with this, although I can see the purpose. I can see some modern uses for it. For me, it's just a little bit out of my comfort, not comfort zone, out of my comfort. However, if you are wanting to make, let's say, grocery bags, something that doesn't have stretch, if you're wanting to weave and have a good strong warp thread, if you want placemats, oh my goodness, that, this is something I'd suggest you look into spinning. And if I had a project in mind that I wanted to make, I think I could really get into the zone of spinning this fiber. I don't know if I will ever reach a point where I am not paying attention to what I'm doing. It is like spinning stuff that's a little bit like short. It's like spinning short fiber wool. Even though the fibers are longer with this top, the top, it's like spinning a short fiber wool where you really do need to pay attention to what your hands are doing versus something that is in a longer roving form or something of that nature. You want to kind of keep an eye on your hands. With that being said, I did actually spin this 14 yards a lot, even with the camera going. I found myself getting into rhythm, into a kind of a zen. So if you're looking for something that is quiet and pulls you into the spin, rather than being distracted or any of that, pulls you into the spin, this is a fiber that I would suggest. It requires thinking about, especially if you're starting out. And there's a rhythm to it that I kind of sometimes lose when I'm spinning wool, because so spinning a lot of the wool that I spin, it becomes rather mindless. If you watch some of my other videos, especially if I'm doing it from a prepared roving, I'm seldom looking at my hands. I am always looking at the TV, distracted by noise around me. This fiber takes me into the moment. So if you're looking for a way to just have a quiet, focused spin, give it a try. If any of the projects I just talked about are something that you want to try, definitely give it a try. If you just want to give it a try because historically it's a vital fiber, give it a try. I will tell you, if I have a need for its properties, it will be what I go to. Now, I have not yet spun hemp or ramie or any of the others, so it'll be interesting to compare them. But as a historical fiber, as a going down the rabbit hole of trying a cellulose-based, a bast fiber, this definitely, it definitely served the purpose of kind of getting me back into spinning and starting me off on this journey. So that, I don't know how much of any of this information might be helpful to you, but that is my spinning of flax. I probably will take the fiber off the distaff. We'll see. Maybe over the weekend I'll try to spin some more. It does kind of pull at you, even though, as I said, it's not going to ever be my favorite fiber. So in comparison, spinning this was actually not so dissimilar to spinning the Herdwick top that I have, that is not the soft undercoat, but the outer hairs that have been combed away and put into top. Very utilitarian in that sense. However, the difference is the Herdwick would never ever be next to Skin Soft. This definitely can be. It has a little, even my coarse first spin, and my husband was saying, oh, it looked like what you were spinning was so very fine. This is a 2-ply. Okay, this is a 2-ply. And this is coarse. This fiber wants to spin really thin. I suspect if I put that on a distaff, it would just try to be spinning one strand at a time, and it would be so strong. So it can be next to Skin Soft. One of the things I'll mention, for those of you who may not have worked with linen much, not the flax that I spun, but the linen fabric. One of the tips I was given by seamstress years ago is if you're working with linen, that you want to take the linen fabric that you want to buy more than what you need, and then you want to take it home, throw it in the washing machine, wash it on hot water, throw it in the dryer, throw it back in the washing machine, maybe throw in a couple heavy towels or a shoe or two. Then throw it in the dryer again and go back and forth, and do that at least 3 to 4 times, and it will soften the linen. And when you're making clothing out of it and you want a drapey linen, you kind of want to do that before you construct the clothing, because you want the garment to have the drape that it'll eventually get. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't do that intensive softening of the linen first, but that was suggested to me, and it is as tempting as it is to work with the stiff fabric so that it's easier to cut and work with. Once that linen goes soft, oh, it's wonderful. So you definitely want to shrink it so that you can wash it and not have it lose its shape over time. That is, if you're like me and you want to throw it in the washing machine and wash it, because the linen will get softer and softer with wear, and then it becomes a more comfortable, breathable fiber. So there is my spinning flax. I wish I had more. I thought about maybe coming and spinning for the podcast, but the truth is that I would have had to focus on the spinning, not on the camera, and that doesn't make for easy vlogging when you have a stationary camera rather than a cameraman behind the scenes. So let's now move on to the fabric part of my fiber and fabric. I have finished, and I'm just going to go ahead and pop up a picture here in front. If you're hearing jingling, I have a cat that's just off the camera, and she has a bell toy that she's playing with, and it's getting closer to me, so it may end up being picked up on this microphone. But I'm going to go ahead and put up a video here, or not a video, because I don't think I have a video, a picture here of the quilt and the pillow that I have finished making. The quilt was started in a mystery quilt well over 13 years ago, I'm pretty sure. So over a decade ago, my son and my daughter and I took part in a mystery quilt sew along, and each of us made a quilt. I ended up making 2, so that I have 2 kids. I figured I'd make 2. And each month we would make a new block, and then we put the blocks together, and we got this quilt. And we had all 4 of the tops made all those years ago, but I wasn't doing very well at the time in hand quilting. And so I was trying to get, I did make a bunch of tops, but I'm only just now getting around to getting them hand quilted, because I have been able to regain a lot more of my ability to hand quilt. So I finished this quilt, a week or 2 ago. I posted a picture on my my Instagram and Facebook, and this one is the one that my son made. And so I've been working on quilting it, probably, I think I started quilting it back in June. I finished the quilting of it, and I hadn't put it away. I still have a Ziploc bag of the leftover fabric, and I have especially a lot of the yellow left over. We weren't really sure when we had found such beautiful batiks and faux batiks when we were picking the fabric out, and we couldn't find the 4th color that was in the same type of feel. And so we went with a solid yellow, and I was so worried about it. And even as I was quilting it, I was still worried about it because it's so flat and intense. However, once it was quilted, once the quilt was thrown in the wash and washed so that the batting would do its shrinking, I couldn't have been more happy. All of the quilting on it, and especially on the yellow blocks, the batting shrinks up around the quilting, and in the yellow blocks, it ended up creating shadows. So it did not change the color of the yellow in any way, other than it created shadows. And those shadows made that yellow go from being a flat yellow to a wonderful kind of modeled, color like the batik would have, like the other fabrics. So of course I had to make a pillow, and this started my English paper piecing journey. And when I was doing this pillow, so years ago when I was first starting out with quilting, I looked at templates, and I have actually helped make a donation quilt that we did for the Habitat for Humanity years ago, in which we did actually use templates. And the difference with quilting is the modern quilting has what we call strip piecing. You cut a bunch of strips, you cut pieces out of the strips, you sew them together, you sew the strips together, then you cut out, make more cuts, and you get all of these different shapes without needing to use individual pieces. But I had done template piecing back in the day. But I did find, so as I've mentioned before, sitting at the sewing machine was not my favorite part of quilting. So sitting down at the sewing machine and sewing templates together, as opposed to larger pieces or pieces that, I'm making a bunch of them at one time, the assembly line of quilting didn't appeal to me. However, English paper piecing, where it's all being done by hand, I would never, and I did try this in the past, or try hand sewing pieces together in the past, and I didn't like the results. But I decided to try it again after having stumbled upon somebody working in English paper piecing. I decided to give it a try, and I fell in love with it. I really fell in love with it. And this is the first block that I made. Now, from a distance, from the 3-foot rule, it looks great. Up close, not so much. And so when I quilted this pillow, I didn't worry about my quilting as much as I otherwise would, because it would fit better with the fact that some of my stitches from the piecing showed through. I learned 2 very, very important lessons right from the get-go. Going with a thinner thread definitely helps have tiny stitches that disappear. Going with a thinner but longer needle helps as well in that process. But that's all part of the first thing. The second thing, so the proper needle and the proper thread makes tiny stitches. Picking a thread that matches one of your fabrics that you're sewing together, that goes a lot further in hiding the stitches. So this one from a distance looks fine. If you zoom in on the pictures that are on my Instagram or on Facebook, you'll see the stitches. And while some may say, well, why would you want to have that go along with a quilt that's recent? The truth is, I love the imperfect nature of it. I even wrote up a blog post about the imperfect nature of it. It really fits. It fits for what's going on in my life behind the scenes right now. It fits for the quilt that it goes with. There is a truthfulness about the journey that is depicted in this. Sometimes we look at our imperfections and we only see them as flaws, rather than a story of what we're going through at the time. One of the things that, if we look at my hand quilting over the years, hand quilting, hand stitching is much like handwriting. It's very individual, very specific to an individual. It's very unique to the individual. And you can kind of read in a quilt that's been worked on by many people, you can read that there's different hand quilters because their stitches will look different. They read differently. So if you looked at my hand quilting over the years, you would see the roller coaster of health issues that have impacted my ability to hold a needle, to hold a thread. My handwriting shows that so much even worse than my quilting does. Even signing a card really hurts my hands. And so my handwriting is a clear indication of the struggle that I didn't know I had for the longest time. So my hand quilting, however, has its good days and it has its bad days. And finding ways to make it more good days than bad days, that's been a real challenge for me, and it's been a success story for me as well. So while this pillow has a lot of flaws and imperfections in it, those imperfections tell the story of my first English paper piecing. And for me, that really fits with the quilt. My daughter has a quilt, her first quilt she made from start to finish, not just a top, but from start to finish. That quilt I have helped her quilt. And so she already has my story in an item of hers. Not to mention her own story. But in this case, this is one for my son. This is a record, you might say, of the stitches, of the time, of what I'm going through, of this time period. And that's why this made it into a pillow. That's why it goes with that quilt. And so I wanted to share that with you because I think sometimes I think a lot of times we're just too hard on ourselves and we try to hide our imperfections. When imperfections, much like scars, tell a story of what we've been through and in many cases what we've overcome, because we wouldn't be making something like this if we hadn't had to go through a learning process. And the learning process can be something we have to go through many times, maybe remedial learning, because life gets in the way and gives us challenges that, well, make it so, like with the fiber behind me, I will tell you, if I had tried spinning that, well, and I know, as I said, I know from the package that I must have tried it once and decided I didn't like it. But I know a few years ago, that would have been something I would have never even done this much. And while this won't be my favorite fiber to spin, it's something I can spin and something I'm not afraid of spinning. The journey of learning, the journey of developing a skill doesn't just have a start and finish. It has a lot of stages along the way in which we might take a step back. We may have made a level of advancement, and then something comes along and we have to start over again, or not from the start, from the beginning, but practice again. And that's what this really does represent for me. So I wanted to share that with you before I moved on to the other fiber, because that is part of the English paper piecing journey I'm going on. And for those of you who are not quilters and not sewers, I thought it was very important to explain why all of a sudden you're going to see a lot more fabric in my Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. Because while I'm challenging myself to spin different fibers, I'm also challenging myself to create slow products. I will still be churning out fast pillows and fast machine embroidery and stuff like that. But this inner block, until we get to this outer yellow, this inner block was all hand stitched. I stitched on the borders as well. I only moved to the machine when it came to the yellow. And that is actually, now that I take that back. This border here, I sewed on by hand. So this outer purple and this yellow were machine stitched. Everything inside was done by hand. And that's just amazing because it is something I've not been able to do in the past. And I want you to just to emphasize this point. In my youth, in the days before I knew the things that were causing me issue, the things that were causing my hands issues, all of that, 20 years ago, before I knew the things I know today, I couldn't do this. My hand stitching wasn't good enough to do this. This is only possible because I found out what was the underlying health issue, and I decided I wasn't going to let it stop me. And so I started with the biggest crochet hook I could find, and then I went to something a little smaller, and then I got my knitting needles out, and I went with big knitting needles, and then I would little by little move to the smaller knitting needles, and then I pulled out my quilting needles, and I sat there with every imperfect stitch, practicing and making the quilts work. Not worrying that they weren't the even stitches of my earlier days. Not worrying that they weren't as tiny. I started with a little bit larger needle. I moved to a little bit smaller needle. And I just made it work. And that is what hooked me on the notion of English paper piecing. Watching young people, a few people my age, but most of the people I've been watching are my children's age, or my I have a couple people that I have some dear people that for a while, let's just say when a person is young enough to have been in the multitude of people I babysat when I was still in high school, I can definitely still call them young. I've been watching a lot of younger people embark on patchwork and quilting with the enthusiasm I had when I started. They've thrown away all of the constraints and all of the baggage of perfection, and they are making it work, and they're making beautiful things, and their artistic ability is shining through. Embracing functional, embracing structurally sound. They're creating artwork. They're creating amazing artwork. Some of them by hand stitching, some of them with more machine stitching, but either way, they're making quilts that are just awe-inspiring. And they're making them from start to finish. They're not putting tops away, stacked up, hoping someday they'll have the financial ability to hire someone to machine quilt it for them. They're making the quilts, and that just makes me happy. So seeing all that, seeing that joy, embracing that joy, it made me want to participate in it. It made me want to do it. It made me want to try it. And then to find that because I had step by step regained mobility in crochet and knitting and spinning, that I had been able to regain something I didn't even realize I'd never fully had, the ability to do this kind of work. So I know I shared a video of me doing the applique of a block, and I'm going to show you that block in a minute. But before I get into the next show and tell, I have to, well, this is a show and tell. I bought myself a little sewing box. Now I have another sewing box that's I've got a little tiny square one that I have had, or little rectangle one that I've had forever now. And it sits by my chair. I have some little wooden bowls, and my husband's even made me a pin cushion a wooden bowl that's a pin cushion, and it holds my thimbles near it. So I have all that next to my chair. But for paper piecing, I wanted something that would contain the larger pieces. And then I went crazy, and even though this is bigger to hold the larger pieces, I have a basket that I hold that I have the bags of all the different the blocks that I've already cut out. But I bought this one. I love the look of it. I love the handle. I love the metal handle and the wooden handle here in the middle. I just loved it. I found it on Amazon. It's good size, and most importantly, it hits this bowl. So this is one of the bowls my husband has recently turned. It was sitting on the table as we were trying to figure out what to do with it, and it's perfect. I clip on some of my little clips to it. It's holding my threads. It has a couple of my thimbles, a pair of scissors, my seam ripper. That, of course, yes, my handy little husband turned for me my seam ripper, and I've had to use this a couple times. And it holds the different threads I've been using. It holds, I have a few more of this type of thing coming. The needle threader. It has my needle threader. It has my needle book. It has a thimble that I was given as a gift over 20 years ago that was a decorative. It's for thimble collecting. I have started using it, and all of the gold plating on the top has flaked off. But it's a good, it's a enameled thimble, and so it's got a good feel to it, and it doesn't change colors on my fingers as some of these guys will. I have two of them here because depending on how my fingers are swollen during a day, actually both of those will fall off. When I am doing this kind of work, I use a thimble on my middle finger because I'm holding the needle with these. When I'm doing my hand quilting, it's completely different. I have an open top thimble that I use on this finger and my thumb, depending on, because yes, I can quilt in 3 directions. There's only one direction that I struggle going backwards. I can't do. I can quilt down, I can quilt up, and I can quilt to the side. And I've found open topped thimbles to do that, because otherwise I was always using my thumbnail and I would drill holes in my thumbnail. So that's another discussion another day. I wanted to share this with you because having something like this, and in my little box here, I have my applique pins, and these are glass head pins, and they are smaller than, they're just a little itty bitty pin. Let me see if I can set this down. I don't even know if you can see it on that. Let's put it there. Now, there you can see it. So normally with a lot of my machine piecing and things like that, I have much longer pins, but I have these little applique pins that I use when I, like in the video that I showed, maybe I'll show that little video here, when I was appliquing down one of my hexagon blocks. And I have that in here. I also have my, let's see, why are you in here? Oh, because that's one that's already finished. Okay. So I have a printout of the blocks that I plan on doing in the upcoming months. And so it's a good size. It holds it. I have extra of the applique needles and the milliner's needles. And that's the things I found. Milliner's needles. There was the big key. So the thread that I'm using, right now I'm using a Gutermann 100% cotton, and it's 50 weight. It's thinner than regular sewing thread, or I should say thinner than a lot of the sewing thread. And it's actually thinner than the machine embroidery thread that I have tons and tons of as well. The larger the number, the thinner the thread in this kind of thing. And it's good, it's strong. I prefer to use cotton as opposed to polyesters for this, for my quilting, piecing and stuff. I have it. I used it for applique. I have a bunch of it in colors because my daughter and I bought some for a project for her. So I've just raided her stash. But the milliner's needle was the key. Even when I've used the applique needles in the past, finding a long, skinny needle. These are actually longer. So they're the same. Both of them are size 9. I am doing a size 10, which is a smaller, I guess you'd say diameter needle, a smaller gauge needle. For my hand quilting now, I've managed to get down to a size 10. But I started with a 9 because I knew I could comfortably hold a 9. Here's the thing. The applique needles, which are twice as long as my quilting betweens, my quilting needles, are still shorter than my milliner's needles. So going with a longer needle made it a lot easier for me to hold the needle, see where I was doing the stitch, but going with a much skinnier needle than a lot of the stuff I'd used in the past makes a world of difference. So if you're thinking of trying something like this, milliner size 9 is a fabulous needle to give a try. Even if you are brand new and you're not used to holding needles, I think a size 9, and I've always, even when I used to show people hand quilting, I think a size 9 is a good size to start with. I think you'll have good results. If you really find it hard to hold on to that, then maybe you need to go to size 8. But I find size 9 to be a very good needle for most people to try as a size to try. So I wanted to show and tell my sewing box, and it's wonderful because I keep my the glue, because I glue based my pieces. I keep my glue in it. I keep basically a lot of the stuff that is English paper piecing focused in that. Okay. So I've shown you video on Instagram, on YouTube, probably a clip here, but I wanted to share. I have it done. So with the English paper piecing, all of those hexagons are hand sewn together. In this case, I have applied them to, well, I can't see it because I have it pinned together for quilting. All of it has been applied to a backing fabric. Now, some people, when they do applique, will go in and cut away the extra fabric in the back. I didn't bother about it this time. I know I can quilt through 2 layers of fabric just fine. But I thought it would be really fun to do a pattern that isn't with a quilt that I'll be making. I can't decide if I want it to be a pillow or it's going to be a small wall hanging. Or who knows, maybe I'll turn it into a placemat, except it's on muslin that's nice and, cream fabric. That's not placemat. So no, it's not going to be a placemat. It's not going to be anywhere near the table. So I can't decide if it's going to be a pillow or if it's going to be a wall hanging. I'm going to quilt it and then decide from there what is going to happen with it. But I thought with Halloween coming up, oh my goodness, I'm dying here. I have inhaled something that I would share. These are all right, I'll do it up close as I cough. I have little witches and spiders, and it is and there was a thread on it in the way for Halloween. But if you're not into Halloween, as I was doing that, it's a pumpkin. In case you can't tell, it's a pumpkin. But as I was doing that, I was like, how about a berry? Doesn't this, covering my face, doesn't this look like it could be a raspberry? So I did a red one. Initially, I thought maybe pumpkins and apples. But as I started doing this one, I was like, this really makes me think of a berry, of a raspberry. And so it's really interesting. It is 3 different colors, and you can see it on the camera. It was very difficult to see when I was getting ready to hand piece these all together, and I had to take it to some very bright light to make sure I could tell the difference between these 2 fabrics. But all of this is hand appliqued on. So I've hand pieced together my hexagons. Then I applied that to a backing fabric. And then I have put my leaves and vines on it. This is the same pattern It's just in different use of the vine. And I use the leaves here as opposed to on the pumpkin. And the template that I have made for the leaves is way too big for this project. So I actually just trimmed it down to size. That's the wonderful thing about doing templates. You can adjust things like applique templates. You can make them however you want them. In this case, I just rounded off this edge, and I may get that fixed before I upload this and share this pattern on my blog post. Now, caveat, I am not going to give instructions on how to sew this. I will share links in the description here below of YouTubers who show how to do this. The thing I will tell you is when doing paper piecing, there is a good amount of figuring it out as you go. And there is also some if you're good at putting puzzle pieces together, there is some easier construction. There is some less easy. The pieces getting really small take a little more fiddly. In this case, the reason these are applied onto backing fabric rather than sewn together is that if you're wanting a square block, it would require a lot of little tiny pieces. Let's see the pillow, I can show you. Tinier pieces. And in this one, there aren't that many, these aren't very tiny, but these other pieces that go in it. So I'm going to be sharing the pattern. So you can print out the templates on your own. You can cut out your own fabric, but my recommendation is to go and check out some of these English paper piecing tutorials that you can find on YouTube if you want to give it a try. I'm going to share the patterns because once I've made them into a PDF, why not upload them and share them? But I'm not going to do a tutorial. mainly because I am figuring it out as I go. I understand it. I can do it. I have done a few of the blocks that I'll share over the upcoming weeks. I have figured out that there's some tips and tricks that I'll share. The thing I'll share right now is in quilting, we talk about a scant 1/4 of an inch. So just shy of a 1/4 of an inch. And we sew those seams especially when we're on the machine and we've cut perfect shapes with perfectly measured seam allowances. When I'm doing English paper piecing, I am not doing perfectly measured seam allowances. And I'm finding that it is a little bit better and more likely to have success for me if my seam allowances are anything but a 1/4 of an inch. Larger than a 1/4 of an inch works better. But the joy of doing this is in the trying it. And that's why it's really fun with the Hexagon. One piece, one template. Okay. Now, with paper piecing, you're attaching the fabric to the template. So you cut out as many of them as you need for the initial, and then you can reuse them later because you pull them out before, applying them down. There's no crunchy paper in this. But one shape, one piece, sew them together. And you can make entire quilts with hexagons. You can, you can make entire quilts with hexagons. You can do all sorts of shapes. So I really recommend, if it is something you want to try, 2 things. Dive in, give it a try, get some scraps, get an old woven garment that you have ready to toss out that's a rag, and cut out the shape and try sewing them together just to see. And if you like it, give it a try. I will tell you that the tighter weave cottons that I'm using, that are quilting cottons, they are much better than the more open, looser weave. I have some vintage fabric that I'm working on. I'll be showing them in the upcoming weeks. If you are a beginner, a tighter weave fabric is going to be your friend a little bit more initially than a lot of the other fabrics. So just keep that in mind. There's a reason that people like using quilting cotton for quilting. Mainly is it can be a very crisp, you can press it and get a very crisp edge. It's also tighter weave so that when you're taking, in this case, stitches, the stitches kind of just sink in and don't run any risk of causing holes or pulling the fibers apart. So the first thing I'd say is just dive in. Give it a try, okay? Second thing is to check out a number of the English paper piecing tutorials. As I said, I will put a couple, I will put two categories. I'll have my spinning videos and I'll put a couple of the videos that I found useful, that inspiring to watch for the English paper piecing. But give it a try. And then think about it again, like with the flax. Think about it and then maybe give it a try again. But it is something that's personal. And the thing that's wonderful about it is you can give it a try, and if it's not for you, it's not for you. Don't invest in a ton of equipment if it's not going to be something that you like to do. And that is the other thing I love about this type of quilting that I'm seeing, and especially the English paper piecing. You can do this with scissors. You can do this with scissors, a pencil, and the cardboard. You know, either you run it through the printer, you print it out, but you can cut out templates. Template piecing. You can cut out templates using cereal boxes. This type of slow crafting is, yeah, it's slow. It's not going to have the project done tomorrow, but it doesn't require a huge outlay of expense either. There are ways of doing it on a budget. And while I am certainly someone who likes to use 100% cotton, I know my grandmother used a cotton poly blend for a lot of the quilts that we love. All right, so there you can see behind me a quilt that's red and blue and all that. That's 100% polyester double knit. So we have things that make life easier, and it's good to use them if we can. But there is nothing wrong with using what you can source. You just might run into a few road bumps that you have to figure out on the way. But it's kind of like some of the easy paper piecing I've been doing. Some of the pieces are really tiny that I've created, and I've had to really figure out how to make them work. So in the upcoming weeks, I'll share more, and I'll tell you about the struggles that I had with each individual block. But today, and yes, it's another long video, today I wanted to share these two things. This is the beginning of this journey for me, and I wanted to be able to share it with you. And the thing I want to leave it on is when let me grab this. When I opened this fiber, as soon as I opened this fiber, the bag had been kind of a little lightly tied shut. And it was really warm yesterday when I opened it. All of a sudden, this wave of smell came from this fiber. Now, someone who works with sheep, sheepy smell is something that is an acquired smell. But when I opened this and the smell came out of it, I was immediately transported back to being a small child on my grandfather's farm and sitting out in the middle of a hayfield. Or when I used to go and play in the hay bales, the stacks and stacks of hay bales and straw bales. This is a plant fiber. And when I opened this bag, I was overwhelmed with memory of having grown up on a farm around plant fibers that, while not flax, the wheat and the hay and just all of the wonderful smells of grass and nature that I had as my youth. It transformed me, or not it transported me. There, that's the correct word. For those of you that make it to the 1 hour mark, you always get something special, don't you? It transported me. It transported me to a different time in my life, a simpler time in my life. And for a few, I mean, I really did. I sat there. I was getting ready to roll it. I wanted to roll it on the distaff. And so I went to my cutting table, which is a somewhat clean surface. I need to do some tidying in my sewing room. And I pulled this out and I laid it out on my cutting table to roll it onto the distaff. But before I could even lay it out, I literally just stood there smelling the fiber. And now the smell has dissipated a little bit because it's been open. I smell the plastic bag a little bit, and it's not as warm today, so it's not creating as much of the aroma. But it transported me back to a simpler time. When we take the time to do slow crafting, we're not just making new memories. We may just be reawakening old memories. Maybe memories we don't know are there. Or maybe we just feel in connection and connected to people of the past that we may never have known, that may not be in our life or our family history, but who did these same things, who made these slow crafts. Not because they were trying to, because they were dealing with their anxiety. This helped combat their anxiety. In their case, their anxiety about how they were going to stay dressed, how they were going to clothe their children, how they were going to keep their family warm. Whether it is patchwork or spinning. People of the past had anxieties just like we do. It's just that their anxiety did push them towards making things like this out of necessity. Whereas our anxiety pushes us to making things like this in order to find peace and calm. I know that doing these crafts have helped me find peace and calm many times through my life. Keeping my hands busy keeps my mind quieter. So, don't be afraid to dive in, and don't be afraid to revisit it after you have finished being frustrated, after maybe you've watched a few more videos, checked out a few more tutorials, read more articles. Sometimes we can go down the rabbit hole of doing too much research before we start and getting caught up in too many rules and suggestions and well-meaning lists, when reality says we just need to see if we can make it work. And that is, I'm going to again mention two vloggers that I have fallen in love with. Actually, I'm forgetting her name. Yes, Emma. I think it's Emma. And it's the sewing basket that I talked about last week. I will put the name here. And Dave's Sewing Room. Two completely different styles, two completely different ways of attacking this process, but both doing so with a freedom that I think many of us, my generation, who took these things on years ago, when we were their age, with a freedom that we, I think, that we lost sight of. So, dive in, embrace whatever it is you are wanting to try, whatever it is you're wanting to delve into, whether it is something you're already doing that you're going to challenge yourself to try something new with. Dive in and enjoy it. and give yourself permission to come back after you finish mumbling and grumbling about how it wasn't what you expected. Because sometimes just getting over that initial emotional challenge of something new, we find it is actually something that has value and we can enjoy. So yes, won't be my favorite fiber, but I'm not afraid to spin it. All right, we've gone past what I expected. I imagine I will have put, some chapters. I appreciate every single one of you that has watched this in pieces, in whole. Thank you. And happy unwinding with fiber and fabric.